It's all football all the time, Panther-Lair.com and here on YouTube.com/Panther-Lair.com. But there was a little bit of basketball last week. I feel like my time is all spent on football all the time for me. But I got a little bit of a chance, as some of you probably did, and a few others in the media got a chance last Thursday night to see the Pitt basketball team in action for a little bit of an open practice, about an hour and a half or so at the Peterson Events Center. It was not long. It was not particularly illuminating, but I think there were some interesting things to see. And for us in the media, we had the extra benefit of getting to talk to Jeff Capel beforehand, so we had that as well. So we have a little context there of talking to Capel and then going out and actually watching the team practice. So even though it's the midst of training camp and it's all football, like I say, all the time, we got a little bit of basketball talk today. What do we see last Thursday when we actually saw this Pitt basketball team, this 2025-26 team in action or in person for the first time? What do we see? What stood out? Were any of our preconceptions reinforced? Were any of them disproved? And what do we kind of make of this team now after actually seeing them in person? I think we all have had a lot of ideas about what this team is going to be and how they're going to look and what they're going to play like and what they're going to do on the court. Over the last 4 months, we've had different ideas about it, but we actually got to see them. And like I say, I think some of our thoughts, our ideas were reinforced. Some of them were maybe disproven a little bit, although not that much. I think we generally have a good idea of who this team is. But let's talk about it. Let's talk about Pitt basketball, what we saw last Thursday night, how our expectations have changed or merely stayed the same, and what do we think about this Pitt Hoops team overall? A little Pitt basketball talk here on the Tuesday edition of the Morning Pitt, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. All right, it's the Tuesday edition of the Morning Pitt, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. I'm Chris Peak from Panther-Lair.com, hanging out with you this morning for a little Pitt basketball talk, switching things up from our nonstop training camp coverage, of which we've got a lot on Panther-Lair.com. Jim was at practice yesterday. He'll be down there again this morning. We'll have comments from Pat Narduzzi on Panther-Lair.com and a full practice report and articles and videos and all those kinds of things. And, of course, we'll have a lot of content right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com as well. We'll have practice video and highlights and press conferences and these Morning Pitt videos every day of the week. We have our weekly live show. We're going to be doing that tonight, 6:30 p.m. right here at 8:30 p.m., 6:30 Mountain Time. That was for all our viewers in Colorado who want to tune in. It'll be at 6:30 for you guys, but for the rest of us here on the East Coast, it'll be 8:30 p.m. Right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. That'll be tonight. We have some scheduling conflicts tomorrow, so we won't be doing that. So we'll be live tonight here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Tune in to join the Pitt conversation because it's always a good time. And if you want to make sure you don't miss any of our Pitt video content, like this video and subscribe to youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. All right, Pitt basketball. Got to see them in person last Thursday night. Watch them go through a practice, a lot of individual drills, and then they kind of finished up with some 5-on-5 stuff, and that was interesting just because there's so many new guys. I mean, I have the roster card here. You can see it. They've got, how many is this? 15 guys. Room for one more. See the empty spot down there? This is the roster card that they gave us, and yeah, there's a space right there, but you got 15 guys on this roster, and only 4 of the scholarship players and 2 walk-ons were on the roster last year. So lots of addition, lots of transfers and high school recruits. Basically a reworked roster. Now, the guys that they're bringing back, some of them, like Cam Corrin and Brandon Cummings, played a decent amount last year. Some were in reserve roles like Papa Abanukanti. Some didn't really play at all like Amni Najai or the walk-ons. But, you've effectively got what amounts to almost a completely turned over roster. And so it always makes it interesting just to see new players and see what they look like. You know what I mean? Like, what do you actually look like in person? We've spent the past 5 months or however long it is talking about Deshaun Jackson, right? Or Noya Sindersitis or Barry Dunning Jr. But actually seeing those guys, seeing them on the court, watching them play DeMarco Minor, seeing what he actually looks like on the court and how he moves with the ball and how he moves without the ball and what he does offensively, defensively. I mean, it's always interesting and unique. And there weren't a lot of fans that showed up. I don't think it was really publicized all that much that it was an open practice. I don't know if they intended it to be publicized all that much or wanted that big of a crowd. But there were a handful of fans there. There was a handful of media, and enough that some of, I think, the observations from that night have kind of spread. But I think for everyone, it was just a chance to see some guys we haven't seen before. Because, look, if you think about last year's starting lineup, Jalen Lowe, he's at Kentucky. Ishmael Leggett, he's playing for like a Wichita State alumni team, right? Zach Austin, he's gone. Guillermo Diaz-Graham went to, where did he go? DePaul or someplace like that. Right, so 4 out of your 5 starters from last season are gone. So you're looking at an entirely new starting lineup, and you're going to fill out the rotation with guys that are entirely new. And so it's going to feel like an entirely new team, and that's because it largely is personnel-wise. And it's also going to feel like an entirely new team because they're going to play very differently. And I think as we've watched the process go this spring and this offseason, and through the summer, as Jeff Capel and his staff have put this roster together with the transfers that they've brought in and who they've gone after and who they've landed, I think we've all sort of gotten the impression that they're going for something very specific, that they have a very clear idea in mind of what kind of team they want. And like I say, before the practice started last Thursday night, we got a chance to talk to Jeff Capel, and that was one of my questions. Like, basically, look, so the question I asked Jeff Capel was, because they had already talked about some of the defining characteristics of this team, the physicality, the rebounding, the defense, of what they want this team to sort of be built on and what they think the transfers will bring, that they'll bring more physicality, they'll bring better rebounding. And I asked Capel, I said, is this the kind of team you've wanted to build for years and you just haven't been able to pull it off? Or is this something you sort of pivoted to more recently? And he just said they wanted to be more physical than they were a year ago. They wanted to defend better and play better than they did at the end of the season. And he made a few references to sort of that before and after split, right? They're 12-2 through the first 14 games and then 5-13 after that or whatever it was. And so he made a number of references to that, the beginning and after sort of split, which kind of lines up with, facing all ACC teams and better competition. But there's no question that this team was built very intentionally. That doesn't necessarily mean it was built well. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to like all the pieces that they added, but it's clear that it was very intentional. They may or may not have gotten their top targets in the portal, but they got some guys they really wanted, and they got guys who fit what they're looking for. And it's these guys. It's big, bruising, physical players. And not all of them are big, but even like DeMarco Minor, who's listed at 6 foot, and he's probably a little bit underneath that, is a physical player. He's a physical guard, pretty solid defender. They're talking about potentially bringing Damian Dunn back, another physical guy, defensive player, and then they have all this size. And that was one of the first observations you make when you look at this team. When we saw them the other night, they're big. I mean, they are a big team. And this is with Deshaun Jackson and Roman Cialepa not even there yet. Deshaun Jackson woke up on Thursday morning and he was sick. Roman Cialepa needs to get a visa to get into the country. Even without those guys, they've got Omni Najai, who's listed at 6'10". Cam Corrin is listed at 6'10". Kieran Mullen, the big Canadian kid, is listed at 7 foot, and he looks every bit the part. He's big. Even some of the guys on the wing, like Cialepa's listed at 6'6", Barry Dunning Jr. is listed at 6'6", Noyes Andrusaitis is listed at 6'5". I mean, they've got some size. And even if don't worry about the wings, but just these guys like Najai and Jackson and Corrin and Conti and Mullen, like, these are big dudes. And it is a big roster. And it is a roster that looks more physical. And it is a roster that should be able to rebound better than last year's team did. And again, we were looking at them without Jackson and Cialepa. So what we all saw on the court last Thursday night was a very big team. And then you're going to add even more guys who are big. So they're big and getting bigger. Of course, the other question everybody had, I think everybody looked at this and said, well, yeah, they were very intentional about getting more physical and adding more size and getting more rebounding, but they didn't seem to be quite as intentional about shooting. And that's a huge question mark. That's been the huge question mark as we've watched this team get put together. Now that it's largely in its finished form, minus that one piece that'll fit right there, that it's largely in its finished form, shooting is still a major, major question mark. And it was funny because I think Jeff Capel was asked about Barry Dunning Jr. and his shooting and what he could bring just as a scorer. And I think he'll be a good scorer. I was impressed with Barry Dunning Jr. last Thursday night, the transfer from South Alabama. I was impressed with how he shot. I was impressed with how he played. I think he'll be maybe their leading scorer. I think he'll provide that kind of offense and be a pretty good player. And what Jeff Capel talked about is something we've all talked about, that, in the second half of the season last year at South Alabama, final 10 games in particular, but like the second half of the season, he shot close to or better than 40% from three. Like, he caught fire in the second half of the season last year. And Jeff Capel said, we're hoping and, we believe he can carry that over. We believe we can help him carry that over and be consistent and do that for a full season. And so I asked him, okay, you're talking about Barry Dunning Jr. carrying over what he did for a half season. Noyes Indricitis was a good shooter in high school or wherever it was. This guy, that guy. Do you feel like a lot of your shooting is mostly based on projections, that you don't have any real proven shooters on this team? You're just projecting guys that you hope will be able to take the stats you're projecting and score and shoot threes at a consistent pace, the way some of these admittedly small sample sizes are pointing to. And he said, yeah, that's true. I don't think he necessarily liked that I was saying he was basing his entire offense on projections, but I think he also acknowledged that that is the case, that this is all projections, that they have to look to Noyes Indricitis' high school career, an AAU career, and FIBA career, and say, wow, he was a good shooter there. We think he can do it again. And look, I'll be the first to admit, at Iowa State, Noyes Indricitis only attempted 14 threes, right? So he was 2 of 14. That's a pretty small sample size. Anybody could go 2 of 14 at some stretch. I'm sure Blake Hinson had some stretch where he only made 2 out of 14 shots. It happens. You get a little cold, particularly if you're a freshman playing college basketball for the first time and you're getting limited opportunities. You might not get into that groove and get that hot hand shooting. But to project that guy to be potentially your best shooter, or to project Barry Dunning Jr. to be your best shooter off of what he did in the second half of a season playing at South Alabama, and that he's going to walk into the ACC and shoot at, north of 35%. I'm not going to say that feels like a stretch, but that's a big projection. He's talking about Deshaun Jackson could step out and make some. You can't count on that. You can't count on your 6'11 center. Well, there are 6'11 centers you can count on to step out and make threes. Deshaun Jackson's not one of them. That's just like last year at this time when they said Cam Corn can step out and make 1 or 2 here or there. No, he can't, and he won't. And that's not something you can rely on. Like, you need consistent scoring on this team. If you're going to be better defensively, and if you're going to be better at rebounding, you need to be able to score consistently. If you make threes and then, you might be able to win basketball games. I just don't know where that shooting is going to come from. Brandon Cummings was a pretty decent shooter last year. I think he could take a step forward. Maybe he can provide it. But from what we saw on Thursday night, Barry Dunning Jr. could shoot okay. Noyes Indricitis made a lot of threes during some of the individual drills, not as much during the 5-on-5, which take that for what it's worth. And then I think we believe Brandon Cummings can take a step and be a bit better of a shooter than he was last year. But that's kind of it. Jeff Capel said, like I said, he mentioned that Deshaun Jackson could step out and make a 3. He said Roman Cialepa is capable of making one. I don't need guys who are capable of making threes. I need guys who are going to make threes, who have shown that they will make threes. They can shoot volume and make a high percentage. Better than 30%, better than 33%. You need a couple guys north of 35% who are shooting volume, making a couple per game. You're not going to have a Blake Hinson who's going to carry you like that, and that's okay. A lot of teams don't. But if you don't have that guy, and there was a time that, the NCAA tournament year where Pitt had 2 of those guys where Greg Elliott and Blake Hinson could both shoot like that. But if you don't have that one guy who can shoot at that high level and shoot for volume, you need a bunch of guys who can make shots. And I think that's what they felt like they had last year with Jalen Lowe and Ishmael Leggett and Guillermo Diaz-Graham and Zach Austin and Damian Dunn. And it kind of worked out. Kind of. But I don't think they have a collection like that. Right now, I think they've got 3 guys. I think they have Barry Dunning Jr., Noyes Indricitis, and Brandon Cummings. And every single one of those guys has bigger question marks coming into this year than Jalen Lowe, Zach Austin, Ishmael Leggett, and Guillermo Diaz-Graham and Damian Dunn had going into last year. Like, there's nothing proven about these three guys, and they're the main shooting options. DeMarco Minor is not going to be a three-point shooter. Like, I was joking watching that practice. Like, nobody's ever going to need to defend him outside the three-point line. Like, they can stay inside the arc and cut off his drives because I think he's a decent driver. I think he can get to the hoop and draw contact. He's like a plus 80% or 80% plus free throw shooter, so he can get into the lane, draw contact, draw fouls, and potentially make free throws. But he's not going to make threes. I don't think I saw him make a three on Thursday night, and not for lack of trying. Amari Witherspoon's an interesting guy. I'm really intrigued by him. I think he's got a lot of good chaotic energy, and I say that's like the highest form of praise I can come up with. I love that kind of chaotic energy, and he seems to bring that on both ends of the court. I'm not sure he's going to be a three-point shooter for you. Makari Moore is intriguing, but I don't think he's going to really be a big factor this year. Yeah, I don't like. Again, it's Dunning Jr., it's Indrusitis, and it's Cummings. And if those guys don't carry their projections, from a small sample size into something bigger, if they don't get more consistent and more effective and shoot better, just shoot better overall, this team is going to have a really hard time scoring because they're going to rely on everything in the post. And guess what? That's pretty easy to defend. And you don't have a power forward. If you're going to start Cam Corn, you don't have a power forward who's going to provide anything in the way of spacing. It's just going to be pack it in, force Pitt to shoot the ball from further than like 8 feet, and then just hope you can out-rebound him. Like, Pitt might lead the ACC in offensive rebounds this year, partially because they're good at rebounding and partially because they might miss a lot of shots, and the rebound opportunities will be there. And I'm not sure, what we saw on Thursday night, I don't think necessarily alleviated any of those concerns. Not all negative, though. I think there's some real points of intrigue with this team. I think Barry Dunning Jr. is going to be a good player, like I said. I think I think DeMarco Minor can be an interesting point guard and a point guard that not like they've had the last couple of years, not like a Jalen Lowe or a Bub Carrington. Probably closer to a Nelly Cummings, although Nelly could shoot better than DeMarco Minor. I think he'll be that kind of point guard. I think he can be a good leader. Like, I don't know if we saw it or not at the practice on Thursday night, but I think, just talking to different people around the program, I think they're happy with how he's sort of led the team in the locker room and how he's kind of stepped up in that regard, which you would expect from a veteran guard who's played a lot and been around for a while. Seems like he's sort of getting guys in line and trying to be that leader, which is a good thing. I think you need that. I think every coach will tell you, I feel like we have good leadership. Pat Narduzzi said that last week. They have better leadership this year than they've had, probably in any time he's ever been there. And I think he says that every year. So the leadership keeps getting better, I guess. And it's hard to ultimately quantify that. DeMarco Minor might be a great leader, and they might only win 16 games this year. It's pretty hard to quantify or qualify how much that's worth. But I think, as a leader for the team, I think he's an interesting guy. If Damian Dunn can return to this team, I think that'll be interesting. It'll add another scoring option, probably one of the better scoring options on the team. As well as good defensive guard and another tough physical guy. I think this team will bang with teams. I think they'll push teams around. I think they'll rebound well and probably defend pretty well. It's just such a big question mark about the scoring. And anytime I ask somebody about that, it gets into, well, if this could happen, and if this can happen, and if this can happen, and if this can happen, there's a lot of ifs in there. And I'm not sure that's a sound strategy for building a team. But we'll see. It doesn't mean it can't happen. It just means that they need a lot to go right for it to happen. We'll see. We'll get back to football talk tomorrow. Certainly we'll have a lot of football talk tonight on the live Panther-Lair show. Make sure you tune in here at 8:30 p.m., 6:30 Mountain Time here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com so you don't miss the live show. Remember, 8:30 tonight, Tuesday night, me and Jim and you talking about Pitt sports. So tune in for that. Thanks so much for tuning in today. Hope your week got off to a great start. Enjoy your Tuesday. We'll see you tonight for the live show. We'll talk to you tomorrow for the Morning Pit right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.